You're a little girl in ancient Rome, only 8 years old. One morning, while playing in your family's courtyard, you hear the sound of horns echoing through the streets. Everyone freezes. The Pontifex Maximus, Rome's highest priest, has arrived. He isn't here to bless the people. He's here to choose a girl who will be taken away to serve the goddess Vesta. Families panic when they see him coming. Parents try to hide their daughters, send them away to relatives, or pretend they are sick. Why? Because being chosen wasn't a blessing. It was a life sentence. If your name was called, you would be taken away from your family that very day. Your old name would be erased, and you'd no longer belong to yourself. You belonged to Rome. And the cruelest part? Your parents could do nothing. Refusing the Pontifex Maximus was considered treason. Even love for your child could not stand against Rome's will. The chosen girls were called Vestal Virgins. They lived in a beautiful building inside the Roman Forum. Marble floors, fountains, and gardens surrounded them. But don't be fooled. It wasn't freedom. It was a prison disguised as a palace. They had 3 sacred rules. Remain a virgin for 30 years. Obey the priests without question. Keep the sacred fire burning day and night. That fire wasn't just a symbol. Romans believed it kept the empire safe. If it ever went out, it was seen as treason. From the outside, people thought Vestals were honored. In reality, their lives were full of fear. Every mistake, even one beyond their control, could lead to punishments worse than death. The girls smiled in ceremonies, but behind closed doors they were watched, judged, and reminded daily that their lives were not their own. If the sacred flame ever went out, someone had to pay. The Pontifex Maximus would question each girl, locking them away without food or light until one confessed. The punishment was called verberatio, a secret beating. The Vestal would be tied to a wooden frame in darkness. She couldn't scream because her voice was considered holy, so they gagged her. She couldn't bleed because her blood was sacred, so the rods were made to cause deep bruises and internal injuries instead of cuts. Some Vestals died days later, but the priest would simply say it was the will of the gods. The worst part? The flame could go out by accident, a strong wind, a mistake by another priest, or even sabotage. Yet the young girls always carried the blame. Imagine being punished not for what you did, but for what nature itself caused. That was the constant terror of being a Vestal, guilt without crime. The harshest crime was breaking the vow of virginity. Even a rumor was enough to destroy a Vestal's life. The punishment? Living burial. At dawn, the condemned girl was dressed like a bride, with flowers in her hair. From the outside, it looked like a wedding. But she wasn't marrying a man. She was being married to death. She was taken to a field outside Rome, where a small underground chamber was waiting. Inside, there was a bed, a lamp, a loaf of bread, and some water. The Romans claimed this wasn't execution. They weren't killing her. They were just leaving her to the gods. But once she stepped down the stairs into that chamber, workers sealed the entrance with stones and earth. She was left in silence, with just enough time to realize she would never leave alive. Her name was erased from records. Her family wasn't allowed to mourn her. She didn't just die. She was erased from existence. To the crowd, it was justice. To the girl, it was slow suffocation in the dark. Her last breath unheard, her body never found. After 30 years of service, Vestals were promised freedom. In theory, they could marry, inherit money, and live normal lives again. But here's the truth. By the time they were released, most were nearly 40 years old, far past the usual age for marriage in Rome. Many men feared them, believing they carried divine curses. Even with money, many ended up alone, abandoned, and broken. The decades of strict control, punishments, and isolation left scars that never healed. Many former Vestals couldn't sleep, feared fire going out in their homes, or lived with constant nightmares. Some chose to live alone, like ghosts of the lives they never had. The freedom Rome gave them was not life, but survival, a hollow reward after decades of stolen youth. The story of the Vestal Virgins shows how Rome disguised cruelty as holiness. These young girls were taken, controlled, and punished in ways that were meant to look like divine justice, but were really methods of fear and control. They remind us that history isn't just about emperors and wars. It's also about the hidden suffering of people whose voices were silenced. So next time you hear about Rome's greatness, remember the Vestals, not as symbols of glory, but as women whose lives were stolen in the name of the gods. Their silence was forced, but their story still whispers across history, a reminder of how power can turn innocence into sacrifice. Not every Vestal followed the rules. Some fell in love, secretly meeting men under the cover of night. To love as a woman was natural, but for a Vestal, it was a crime against Rome itself. Historians whisper of secret affairs between Vestals and powerful senators, soldiers, even emperors. Some men saw them as trophies, believing that conquering a Vestal's purity gave them divine power. But discovery was fatal. The Vestal would be buried alive, and her lover whipped to death. Still, desire could not always be silenced. Imagine the terror of stolen glances, of a single touch meaning death. Love became a weapon, and passion a curse. Every rumor of romance was another reason for the priests to tighten their chains, proving once again that even the heart was not free under Rome's gods. For nearly 1,000 years, the Vestals ruled the spiritual heart of Rome. But as the empire weakened, so did faith in the old gods. When Christianity spread, the sacred fire that had burned for centuries was finally extinguished by Emperor Theodosius in 394 AD. The last Vestals were dismissed, their temple abandoned. No longer were young girls stolen for service. No longer were women buried alive in silence. The cruel cycle ended, but the scars remained. Some of the final Vestals lived long enough to see the world change. Imagine them, old and frail, watching the city abandon Vesta for Christ, realizing that their entire lives of sacrifice had been for gods now declared false. The fire went out forever, not because of wind or neglect, but because Rome itself had changed. And with it, the voices of the Vestals faded into history. Tragic echoes of innocence turned into sacrifice. If this exploration of hidden history struck you, subscribe for more untold stories. And let me know in the comments, which forgotten voices from history should we uncover next?